we are starting not with reusability, but with some work. Yes. Well, well, the agenda. First, we will do some introduction, and then, well, I don't need to give you the agenda. You will discover along the activities. So let's do the first one. This one is called Meet Your Neighbor. Look around. Is there a neighbor you don't know? Yes. Hey, stop. Hey. Okay. You got into it too quickly. You need to introduce yourself. What objects types do you work with, and what is your experience with FAIR? If you do not have a neighbor, you can stand up and find a neighbor. A neighbor you might not know. If you are online and you are not part of the activity on site, you have in the document a place to write your name and some other information to kind of meet the neighbors online. So please follow the link. You're late. Meet a neighbor. room. Come, come. It is time to stop the talking. I promise you, you will talk more later with your neighbor. I need a kind of a sound. No, I don't have. Thank you, Carol. Okay, I promise you will have time to discuss more later. For those who are a bit late to this session, I'm going to go back to this one. You are going to create the magic. So please interact with the people around you. This is really important. I'm going to go over to the next part of our agenda, which is celebrating fair impact and fair call for EOSC result. And this will happen with the session panelists. Each of the panelists has 2 minutes, but I told them that they can take their time and tell you things because they have only 1 slide, which is hard to do. So I'm going to start with our first panelist. Come on board, Wim.
There should be a slide somewhere. There we go. Okay, so I actually want to start with a story from many lifetimes ago when I was working mostly in the field of environmental data, biodiversity data, and so on, very early days. So that was during the time when paper maps were being digitized for the first time, that long ago. And I was part of a project that made use of students, and those students were digitizing paper maps one after the other for pocket money in a huge lab. And they would take the data that they've digitized and put it onto something that we refer to as a stiffy, but which I discovered in the rest of the English-speaking world, it sort of leads to all kinds of blushes and awkward moments and so on. But anyway, and the students or the supervisor in that project used to walk around in that lab, and if a stiffy didn't have a label on it, he would take that stiffy and break it into pieces and throw it into the waste paper basket. Because data without metadata is utterly worthless and cannot be reused by anybody. So reusability starts with metadata, but it also starts with the quality of the data that we create. So in the FAIR Core for EOSC and FAIR Impact projects with a CAT and accompanying knowledge base, we created the infrastructure, as it were, for the foundational part of it, which are the persistent identifiers that you might use to reference the objects or the outputs themselves, and the things that you refer to in your data. So that's where the quality assurance starts for the purposes of reusability. And then when I want to leave you with a final thought, which is the last point there on the bullet, is that there are other dimensions to reusability that we don't talk a lot about. And that's determined by the purpose of reuse. So we've started working on a framework with other partners in dance that we informally called Prada, which I suppose at some point we will not be able to use anymore. But it focuses on the fact that the purpose for reusability could be publication, it could be reproducibility, it could be analysis, readiness, which means that other people in the same domain can also use that data. So the variables and the dimensions and so on are properly described. It could deal with decision readiness. And from an open science perspective, this is the most important part, because open science promises that making your research outputs open will lead to better societal outcomes. But there's absolutely no way that that will happen if the data cannot be used in some or other way for supporting decisions. And I think that chicken came home to roost during the COVID pandemic, because there was an almighty scramble to find reliable information to respond in a policy manner to the pandemic. Nobody knew where to find the stuff that they needed to respond. And then the final one, which is quite topical, is AI readiness. So we need to start producing these data sets with AI in mind. It's not the only thing that we're going to do with that data, of course, but we might as well make sure that it is machine readable in such a way that the quality and precision of what we get back from these models can be improved. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Wim. Now I call for Hervé. And I will remind my panelists to present themselves when they come here.
I'm Hervé. Et voilà. You can meet me afterwards in part of the interactive bit, I suppose. Hi, everyone. This is the subject of a support action, which is actually in progress at the moment. And in a nutshell, what we're looking at is exposing repository information and information about the objects they hold in a way that can be harvested and validated. That's ongoing. It's based on a set of existing guidelines. The guidelines that are out there already, the links up here, is about exposing relevant information, functions and characteristics of both the repositories and the objects, exposing from an originating source, like a trustworthy source, clarity on how information should be expressed to support humans and machines in some kind of clear way, assertions and validations, which is one of the next steps beyond what we're doing at the moment, and obviously appropriate standards. Now, the two final pieces here are related to the repositories and the objects. At the repository side, it's about expressing the level of care actually being applied to the object, retention, curation, and preservation in a clear way. And the final one relates to other things you'll hear today about the FAIR and the FAIR tools, making sure that multiple FAIR tools have got a coordinated way of scoring what you're doing and giving clear, supportive responses. The underlying theme that you've got for all this really is that there's a lot of talk about trust, but transparency is the major driver for that trust, and doing that in a clearer way is obviously very important. And something that we haven't got at the moment, but which we're looking to, is seeing the repositories as a single source for that information about the repositories themselves, but also about the digital objects that they hold. Now, that's being done through the demonstrator in a series of sort of DCAT and JSON statements. But essentially, this is all about populating the information from a trustworthy source and making sure it's harvestable all over the place, the old expose once, harvest anywhere principle. Now, obviously, once this is there and trustworthy, that puts me as a repository in a situation where I can expose that information, I can control it from my side, and many other people can harvest that into repositories, registries, knowledge graphs, etc. The principle is fairly simple, but actually the potentials of the implementation are fairly large. In terms of the reusability topic today, this is really got the option to be expanded into key reusability statements. Something we're not brilliant at. I mean, part of this discussion is bound to be about talking about our audiences and their needs, and how we all coordinate those needs and do something consistent. So in terms of reusability, we're looking at data usage licenses, the really thorny issue of provenance, what provenance is enough for what kind of reusability, and the community standards, and where the authority comes for building those community standards, for defining them, and for managing them over time. And based on our baseline recommendations that we did for the FAIR principles in a couple of previous projects, a lot of this is about taking some of the fuzzy terms within the FAIR principles and working out what they mean in practice for a particular discipline or domain. That's me.
Thank you. Thank you, Hervé. And now we have Alex. Come join us. Just a quick comment. Can we have on the timer 3 minutes, because they took 3 minutes both and don't want to give less. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. I'm Alex Ioannidis. I'm working at CERN, and I wear two hats there. One is the hat of the Zenodo service manager, so I make sure that Zenodo runs and is available for the whole world for everyone to use and deposit their outputs. It's okay. And the other hat is a bit more meta reusable. I'm the principal architect for Invenio RDM, which is the underlying platform that Zenodo is running on. And this is the same software that can be used basically by other libraries, universities, research labs to host their own instance of, not Zenodo exactly, but basically have the same features. And in October, we launched our integration with Zenodo and Software Heritage. And you can look at the blog post, the announcement there by scanning the QR code, but I will talk a bit about what this is all about. So why do this? And the first idea basically is that, okay, software is going to be there. We're going to develop it. We're going to basically have it in different places, on GitHub, on Zenodo, in our own local repositories, right? In GitLab, for example. But this is not enough in terms of traceability and transparency. So we want that basically when somebody deposits a software on GitHub, and let's say they have the integration enabled for getting things from GitHub to Zenodo, then there's also another part where, okay, there's software heritage that takes care of the long-term preservation of the software. So, and this wouldn't work without actually linking all of these things together with persistent identifiers. So again, you find some software in the wild, you have to be able to trace back its journey and be able to, and this is for reproducibility as well. Right? Then the other issue we sort of addressed was the metadata limitations that we have. So we have software that, again, as Wim said, maybe has no metadata or has very sparse metadata. And that's very important for, again, citation. Be able to cite the software, know exactly what kind of, what's the authorship, what's the provenance, again. And this is also something that is solved. We adopted code meta as a schema on Zenodo, so it's possible to describe your software even more in rich metadata, and this metadata also makes it over to software heritage. And finally, as I mentioned, so this doesn't work like if infrastructures have to do extra work for this to work, that makes it very difficult. So what we have done is basically that this integration is not something that you have to spend an enormous amount of time to figure out and work on, right? It's something that if you run something like Invenio RDM, it's very easy to enable it, and this works basically behind the scenes to, again, archive your software that researchers deposit in your repository to software heritage, which is a broader adoption. And I leave you with a question. So we've done all of these things. What else do you think has to be done to improve basically software usability? And that's it.
Thank you, Alex. Let's check who's next. Next is Elena. Come and join me. And remember, introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elena Breitmoser. I'm from the University of Edinburgh. And my colleagues at Edinburgh, like Neil Chuhong, Mario Antoletti, and Kara Morav, we worked on the FAIR software metrics and automated assessment. So everyone cares about making their software useful and reusable, at least if it's open source. And I think this should be stressed because I've come across a lot of people in this project or participants in the open calls which thought like, okay, FAIR, it has to be open source. And I think this is a misconception we have to make people aware of. So for example, if you have like sensitive data, not everyone can see them and work with them. It doesn't mean you are out of having to consider thinking about fairness. You can still do that. You can make them findable, accessible, and also tell people how they can access them, even if it's more complicated and not like just everyone can do it. Also, the reusability is not addressed by one single absolute metric. There are several metrics, and they are all about like licensing, documentation. What we did in our project, in our task in the project, we extended the existing automated assessment tool for fairness, which is Fuji, developed by the University of Bremen. It has been for data, and we expanded it to make it usable for research software. How we started out, we had like 17 metrics we came up with. That was the first step in the project, based on the FAIR for Research software principles. And then we actually tried to get our hands on the Fuji tool and see how can we really implement all these metrics. Because of time and money restrictions, we were only able to do this for a handful of the 17 metrics. It was just a proof of concept. But we actually did implement the ones which were concerned about reusability. So FRSM stands for FAIR Research Software Metrics. So number 13 and 15 out of the 17 we implemented within the project. And number 13 says, does the software describe what is required to use it? And this covers actually two of the R ones. They are also like R1, R2, R11, and so on. And we did this for domain agnostic and domain specific examples. The domain specific one was taken from the social sciences, from CESTA, who kindly supported us because they had a very extensive list and also very comprehensive list of what ticks their boxes for being fair, what has to be fulfilled from their point of view. And it actually turned out it was partly very challenging to suddenly have to implement it and translate this human comprehensible sentences like of, does it have a license? That's rather relatively straightforward still to implement. It looks, for example, for SPDX files. Where does it look for it? What other file extensions are possible for licenses? This is just a simple example, but then when you look for documentation, do you look like in documentation folders? Do you look, assuming people use Python for like a requirement.txt file? There are a lot of standards, but the problem is that there are still a lot of standards around, and really to be able to cover all of them is quite challenging, and I think you really have to be aware of this. The second metrics, 15, does the software source code include licensing information? I just covered that, and I said it's easier. And we found it interesting that we had like this open call action, as I said, where people could work with us and try our Fuji tool and see how it worked on their repositories. We got really a lot of interesting feedback. For the time being, what is being used with Fuji is, and our extension of it is just GitHub repositories. It can be relatively easily extended to have the harvesters always also look like for GitLab repositories, for example. But this is just the beginning, and we hope to see what you think about reusability and automated assessment tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. And last but not least, Daniel, come join me.
Thank you. So my name is Daniel Garijo from Universidad Politécnica of Madrid. And what I wanted to talk about you today is a little bit of the work that we did as part of FAIR Impact project. I don't know why I see the slide correctly here, but I'm sorry, Clement, but I don't know why the offer was. I promise you that in the slide is correctly phrased. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the challenges for FAIR semantic artifact assessment and reusability. We came I'm one of the developers of FOOPS, which is one of the tools that we have done to assess automatically and try to help people how to check the compliance of their vocabularies and ontologies against the FAIR principles. This is based on years of experience also that we had at the Ontology Engineering Group, which is our group, at the Universidad Politécnica of Madrid. And I don't think I'm going to say anything new from the previous speakers, because basically for reusability, you have to look at first the metadata, second the documentation, three license and provenance, right? All the speakers have emphasized this, and I wanted to emphasize this as part of my brief talk as well. And in particular, for ontologies and vocabularies, this is a schema that is driving the knowledge graphs. So if there is no documentation and you cannot see how the things are related to each other, then it's absolutely worthless. Also, if you don't add labels on and definitions on what the terms means in your schema, then they are very, very difficult to reuse because people will understand different things. I think we experience this in every single project where we need to collaborate with each other. No? If there is a glossary, then you can understand each other. If there is no glossary, then there is a lot of confusion. So what we started supporting, we started supporting some of this in our tools. And in order to make sure that the metadata that we recognize from vocabularies and ontologies is the same, we launched a landscape analysis. We put it together with the MOD API and vocabularies that Clement has already been introducing all day yesterday. And what we are going to focus on next is, rather than just tell you what you did correctly or incorrectly, is going to be here is exactly what you need to do. So actionable suggestions that are tailored to your particular resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And what's next? It's your time. Are you ready for the next activity? Because this one might relate to what you have heard here. So what we have, metadata, licenses, documentation, but do you care about reusability in your current role, and why do you care? This is something to discuss with your neighbor. So if you didn't find a neighbor before, this is the time to take a neighbor and discuss that. And for people online, we have a link to a file, so you can discuss on the file. Go. No, because you know each other. So find another neighbor. Seven. You have 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 3. Talking. One minute. 1 minute. Ooh, the timer's out, which means that I need to get your attention. Please. No, Carol, that's okay. They will understand slowly that they need to end the sentence with respect, and then we go. Okay. Blue, a Microsoft one. No, thank you. Okay. Did you enjoy that? Yes. Okay. With a show of hand, do we care about reusability? I'm not going to ask if someone doesn't care about reusability, but if you want to raise your hand for that, you can kind of be the controversy to say something after that. Someone wants to take this opportunity. I'm looking at Carol, but no.
What we discussed, though, was the confusion between reusability. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. And what we did discuss was the confusion. Hello. There we are. What we discussed was the confusion between reusability and reproducibility. And this is not useful. I think everybody believes in reusability, but reproducibility is something else. And I think that was a useful discussion, actually. So did anybody else discuss that? Oh, that was just us in the corner. Just ignore us.
Does someone want to answer that about reproducibility? Reusability or reproducibility? Wim.
No, I agree. It shouldn't be confused, but for me, reproducibility is a type of reuse. A reproducible, trying to reproduce the results obtained by someone else is a type of reuse.
Excellent. Maybe that's time to bring the panelists here, and I see that there's a hand raised there. Panelists, before the hand raised, come to the, yes, Wim. I know that you're not used to it. Come, join Alex, Elena, Hervé. You will answer and be on stage. Maybe a round of applause from the panelists because they did a great job there with their 2 minutes. Okay, let's continue with reusability, reproducibility. Yes, Clément.
Yeah, so maybe that's going to be the question for the panelists or kick off something. But I like the word reusability, and I think it's very important that it's present in the FAIR principle. But there is even the word reuse that I think it's more important than the reusability. And if I explain, reusability put the emphasis on the fact that if I make my data, I need to make it reusable. So the responsibility is on the fact of putting your data out and making it reusable. If you take the word reuse, then it makes that you have made the effort when you build your data to reuse data from someone else. So it changed the responsibility from one person to the other. That's something I think it's interesting to reflect on.
Thank you, Clément. I heard some clapping maybe for that, no? Someone else from the audience want to, or someone of the panelists wants to answer to this reusability, reproducibility, reuse? You don't? I think it will work. No, it doesn't work magically.
Salut Clément. You raised a really good point, and one of the things from the repository perspective is that no matter how much expertise we've got, there are certain things which can only come from the original researchers. The more that's captured at the point of conception, creation, collection of the data, the more accurate it's likely to be. So you're absolutely right. Having that mentality, not only that I must share my data and I must provide the metadata, but seeing the benefits of reuse and getting credit for reuse is essential. And making sure that if they think that through at the very beginning, while they're creating and reusing previous data, that makes a huge difference in the upstream effects of the quality in the repository.
Yeah, so I think this reuse perspective is very important. And the reason for this is it's, again, investment of time and money that we have absolutely no way of recovering at the present time. So if you look at all these studies, then people say they spend 50% of their research money preparing data, or 70% or whatever, but they've got no way of recording the improvements that they made to that data set to make it reusable in their context, somewhere where somebody else can find it and do it also. So if you are preparing a data set for your own use, you generally may convert it to a more standardized format that can be understood by software tools and so on, but you don't share that information of reuse back to the original data set entry in a catalog somewhere so that somebody else can also make use of that process.
Can I say something? So I think you raise an important point here, which is the best elements of success that I've seen when reusing stuff is when the people the people publishing the data are actually the ones who reuse that data as well. And that happens also for software applications and so on. If you are actually consuming what you are putting out there, you make sure that it can be reused because you are one of the clients of that application or that data. Otherwise, there is a little bit of disconnect between what you hope it's well enough to be consumed by others and actually the exercise of reuse. So I fully agree that in this exercise of making things reusable, the first exercise that we should do is attempt to actually reuse ourselves what we put out there. And it may sound trivial, but it's not.
True. Oh, I see a hand raised. Thank you, Rita.
So I just want to give an experience, a past experience on data reuse. Some years ago, I took some digitized old papers with tables that were just scans from the 70s of Voyager data at outer planets. And so those were published in astronomy and astrophysics, but there was no digital form, not a spreadsheet with or CSV file or whatever. So I did the job. I tried to publish it. And basically, the answer that I got from the publishers is that you don't own this data, so we cannot publish it. And that was now, the data was in a form that it could be reused, but nobody wanted to publish it. So we have to solve that too.
Absolutely. Someone wants to answer that? No? Okay, I have a, yes?
Katrina Exter, Flanders Marine Institute. This is one area, sort of pinning back to what we discussed yesterday, that I find that the organizational barriers are huge. So with reusability, with findability, accessibility, interoperability, most of the time, an organization isn't wasting its researchers' time when they tell them to put it in a repository, because on the whole, it doesn't take that long. But repositories can only put in so much metadata that takes care of reusability. And in I'm coming with a background of provenance rather than just reusability. So trustability, traceability, and reusability. There's only so much metadata you can put at the catalog level to sort of describe all of this. So if you want to do it properly, you actually have to make your own provenance file, which includes part of the data. And that takes a long time, not only to create it. And a lot of organizations, a lot of people I've talked to, for example, about having electronic notebooks, there's an organizational reluctance, kind of 19th century attitude, 18th century attitude even, that no, I don't want my students to do this. I don't want my researchers to do this. I don't want my technicians to do this. I come from the background of the life sciences. Because it's wasting their time. And so this is an area where the actual researcher, the data producer, I should say, has to actually do work on their own, sort of come up with these values that describe the full provenance. So this is an area where you need a lot of sticks to sort of bang them at the organizations and give the carrots to the data producers who are doing the work.
It seems that from my perspective is that it's also a question of possibility. If the infrastructures do not implement the possibility to have this metadata and in provenance included, then it's the first part of the NOSAC pyramid. It make it possible. So what can we answer for that? Make it possible. Someone wants to take that.
Well, it's a basic, sorry, one of the problems is that, like, this happens from both sides. So we do get people pushing for us to have more information from people who previously reused data, but there's complexities on both sides. So we are in a position where we get told, well, why would we create that bucket that no one's going to fill? And then we get pushed from depositors saying, well, I've got all this information, but there's no bucket to put it in. So you end up with like an incremental increase, which is why the piece on the developing the standards to create the containers, to create the awareness becomes kind of a virtuous circle of making sure that there's an awareness. But the other end of that equation is we have to demonstrate to our internal teams that this information we pass on to our users in a download or whatever feels useful to them, because overloading the users with gigantic quantities of metadata to prove how careful and diligent and trustworthy we are is not necessarily what the users are after either.
Just a second, there's a big wave there, so I'm taking the big wave and I'm coming back to you.
Because I wanted to react on this
yes,
provenance and collection of metadata. Marek Cwecajer from EOSC Institute Prague. This is, as it was mentioned, the electronic notebooks can help, but the electronic notebooks are not much more work, because if you have them connected to the workflows and automated systems, this is actually something which you get for free. So it's actually not more work, it's much less work if you use electronic notebooks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say there are a lot of tools that help tracking provenance, also adding a little bit of metadata, but I think the problem here is not a technical problem, is a social problem, because you have to convince students. And I share this frustration a lot, because a lot of the time that I have mentoring students is trying to convince them on, well, or not convince them, I tell them they either put the things online or they do not exist for me, right? So part of the struggle is not only having the putting things online, but properly describe so other people can reuse it and so on. It's a change in mindset that we have to incorporate to the students when they are learning, because otherwise it's a little bit difficult to do always this as an afterthought after they have been trained, because they initially do not see the value when they think short term.
Thanks, Danny. Ola, too many hands. Yes, first one.
So what you said is right, and what we also deal with researchers on everyday basis, and what we tell them, it's not just reusability for the other person, but it's also for future you. Yes. Because after 4 years, you don't know what you did 4 years back, and you don't even know your note, so how will someone else reuse it when you yourself who did it can't reuse it? So that's one of the things, that's a low-hanging fruit, and that's the practical thing to kind of say that.
Yeah, I always tell them that, but I do not always have the 2 years to prove it.
Who's the next hand? Oh, wow, there's 2 hands in the same time. Mark first and then Tommy.
Yeah, I also want to comment on what he was saying is, if you want to reuse the data in 40 years, you also need to provide more context to the data. Why is the data being generated? In what context is the data being generated? And that is, I'm not sure if that is part of provenance, but providing more context, certainly if you have the reusability in long term, becomes, I think, still more important.
Thank you, Mark. Tom?
Yeah, you know that I'm not very good. Oh, sorry.
No, yes, it's you, but someone else got the mic as well, okay. So go ahead, Tommy.
Not very good at being brief, but I have a couple of ideas. One is source code reuse. If I have developed a piece of software that, for example, analyzes data, I know how it works, and I trust it, and I know exactly the task it does. It is easier for me to reuse it later on in my career because I know that how that works and how I can trust it. But the lady's point was completely valid. I will probably forget how I coded it 10 years later, and then documentation would be highly valuable. So in that sense, I think if you take someone else's source code, you can't trust it blindly. You actually have to read through the source code and understand what it does in order to be able to kind of trust that it does what it's supposed to do, in what way it does it, so that it's efficient and correct and so forth and so on. But there's actually exactly the similar problem with data. So I was doing modeling of value chains and how they perform economically, socially, and environmentally. And all the data sets I found were related to the outputs of the processes, like, for example, boards from a sawmill. And all the indicators that I found were related to the outputs, but I needed data for the inputs, related to how much it consumes things. So all the data sets that I found when I was looking for, they ended up describing the wrong thing. So it's also a little bit similar. When I have created those data sets myself, I know how they are done, and I know that they're right, and I can trust them, and I should document them well. But this is the problem, is when you're looking at someone else's data, there's really a lot of data that has a lot of information related to the assumptions related to collect that data. I mean, if I look at, I don't know, measuring how needles do photosynthesis, that is more kind of absolute data that doesn't have so much interpretation related to it. But in many cases, the barrier for reuse is trusting the data that it does exactly what you need it to do, because it can do that on the description level, but when you open it, you find out, no, this doesn't work. So there's still something missing in how we can describe what is the fit for purpose, what is the use of the data, because really a lot of data is not absolute measurements of something environmental or something that is directly usable, and when you discover it, you know that I just put it in this R code and it does exactly what it should. But there's so much more data which is, I don't know what I don't have the words to explain this exactly, but it just can't be used without a lot of human labor in between. And even if you discover a lot of data sets, you might be frustrated by the amount you find, and when you look at 15 out of the 500 you found, you realize that none of them do the job. And it's just this much more efficient to recollect all the data yourself for the case that you have to research. So this is something that I think is missing often from the discussion of reuse, because we are talking about across EOSC sharing all these resources, but it's not always so easy to then actually make a productive use of it.
Thank you, Tommy, for a comment, because I can move to this slide, because here we are comparing the FAIR data principles with the FAIR for research software principles. Not that it is responding exactly to the question here. There are limitations to the FAIR principles for both digital objects. So we have this problematic also for software. I'm not going to read those. I'm going just to put that so you can look at it. And I do have, I think, another microphone running around. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just had a comment on that reusability gets really challenging when it comes to cross-domain. So as said, the data producer are often the same bubble as the data reuser. But for example, in climate science, we have the observational people and the climate model people, and they have a complete different mindset. The modelers need the data, the observational data, and here is trust very important, that you trust this other kind of people. This is the social aspect as well. Yes, just this aspect that is oft, you said that, yeah, my neighbor, the next office, of course she can use my data but she has the same mindset, but yeah, okay.
Thank you. I see. Yeah. Oh.
Hi. Yeah. So I'm talking about environmental data. So one of the things we do is we've got all of the UK's climate projections up until the end of the century, so provided to us by the Met Office. They come in as NetCDF files. I mean, some of those we got down to 5 kilometre resolution at hourly intervals all the way up to the end of the century. So there's a lot of data there, and that's freely accessible, and it's part of the reusability is knowing your target audience. So some people will just take the raw NetCDF files and you use them like that, but we've had to build a load of services on top to enable us to subset the data and convert the data. So the main data format that gets downloaded is CSV files, which are nice and easy for anyone can use, and also do shape files as well. So part of that, if you want to encourage the reusability, you need to know the target audience and make it easy as possible for them to actually reuse that data.
Thank you. You want to?
Yeah, so Anthony and I were discussing this, so we were thinking that, to the extent that there is still room for technical support for reusability, is to maybe come up with this more generic perspective of supporting content negotiation for format and schema changes in a standardized way, which is effectively already a standard in a way, and also subsetting, because for large data sets, this is a very common use case in certain domains. Is I don't want all of this data, I only want some cross-section of it for some specific purpose. And then while I have the microphone, I just want to say I fully support this, that this is a social problem. And any system will work if the stick is big enough. That's my experience. So we need to make it simple and very simple for it to adopt, to be adopted widely. But on the other hand, there's also responsibility on the researchers to walk the extra mile, so to speak.
Thank you, Vim. I'm going to stop. No, sorry, I know I'm going to stop you, but okay, Elena, go ahead, and then activity time.
I think it's an interesting point to say you have to know your target audience, but I think this is also a target moving over time, because the data like we have about climate or maybe health data, even maybe from the 19th century, this might still be important information for us or for the future generation to know and to handle these kind of data. And how do we make it possible that this is still accessible and interpretable in a useful sense and that we don't misinterpret it, so that these standards, they shift over time. And so how do we understand this kind of data?
This is a good transition for the next activity, because you will discuss among yourselves how do you see reusability. We started as a large room, but not everyone had the opportunity to speak and to say their mind. So you have the time now to talk about reusability. And another question that's not written on the slide, which is, are the FAIR principles enough for reusability? And is it crucial to do open science? Go.
No. No, but no. I mean, and to anyone that tells me that
For people online, you have the activity 3, reusability scope. I hope you can hear me with all this noise here. You have 2 minutes left. 2 minutes. You've got 1 minute to conclude your discussion. 1 minute. There's a lot of things online. I was thinking maybe this could be a nice goal or something to highlight. See if I see it on my screen. 10 seconds left. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. That worked better. I will note that for next time. Thank you very much for being so engaged in this activity. You should know that people online are also very engaged and they are completing the Google Doc. And if you want to see what they have written, you can also open this Google Doc. The link to it is also on the program. And you have also the link to the slides. So if you want to go back to the panelists, one slide with the QR codes and links, you have it directly on the program. Something I wanted to highlight about this question from the notes from the online people is one quote, which is, "The support staff are making considerable efforts to raise awareness, train and inform, and we need to be pugnacious. It's utopian to think that this is enough. Only a legal and political framework will change things. The rest is only technical." Ooh, a bit of a, yes, controversial. Let's continue with our programs. Anyone want to bring stuff from your discussions to the floor and kind of share with us? Anyone wants to share? Is fair enough. Anyone from the panelists? I have, yeah. Who's my microphone? Oh, microphone is coming, microphone is coming. Mark, raise your hand.
Making data reusable takes a lot of effort. How do you want to credit researchers for doing it?
Ooh, this is a good question. Yes, go ahead.
So one of the things that we might consider is to teach people to register the effort that they put into reusing it into the metadata schema on Crosswalk's registry, because it doesn't have to be metadata only, because then it becomes a citable reference to the effort they put into transforming data into a useful format for themselves. It makes it findable again. other people who reuse similar data sets can find that transformation. So that's maybe a practical way to try and test it out.
But that helps others, right? Yeah. I think the question was like, how can we make sure that they get a benefit for themselves? One thing that we have been trying to push at some conferences is do this through badging. So conferences like KDD now support having an artifact badging, artifact available badge, yeah. Right? So now if your paper complies with certain requirements, you will get this badge, and it's like a special recognition to credit the people that goes the extra mile and do this extra effort. I think this may be one of the rewarding mechanisms that we can enable. But if you have other suggestions, I think now would be a great time to share them with all of us.
Go ahead, Alex. Thanks.
Maybe another thing is, so it's about how do we measure the usage. So for example, we have counter code of practice, and the make it account code of practice, where how do we exactly measure like downloads, views, like the actual, like how much a dataset has been downloaded and used. And this is a very concrete sort of metric, and this is something that we can advertise in sort of like it's very solid proof. So when you see a dataset with 300,000 downloads, you say, okay, this had an impact, and people actually.
Thank you. I see that there's
I've also seen other platforms incorporating the effort that the trainers put into also sharing some of their best practices. No, I know TESS has a catalog of training resources, and now I think it's from Athena, it's called Epicuron, where they start tracking also the contributions of people who actually spread the good practices, and they spend time in training and dissemination. So this can also be credited.
Yes. Go.
Okay, hi. I will try to be a little bit controversial and go back to the source. In many fields, the data producers are the PhD students or master students, and they have to be done with their thesis, with their study program, and all those things that you mentioned, badges and I don't know, likes and thumbs up. Yeah, okay, but it doesn't work for them. It's not enough. It doesn't count. So when I do my PhD in computer science, a badge doesn't give me anything. I need papers, and I need to focus on them because it's becoming more and more difficult to publish in every field, and I need 2, 3, 4, 5 publications, and the badge doesn't help me. So I agree with everything what you said. I just try to bring something out there.
I agree. I mean, you get citations because suddenly everything that you have produced becomes citable, and that's another recognition. And well, it may not be a paper, but at least the landscape is changing, and now in academic curriculum, datasets software that is being put online is starting to be recognized. We are not there yet, I agree, but at least in Spain, they started considering this as value and a recognized academic contribution.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap this up because we have 13 minutes left before the coffee break. I know you discussed with your neighbors, but maybe you have other neighbors to talk to. Before we move on to the last activity that we have, I wanted to share with you the diagram that we've created for the FAIR for Research software principles, saying that FAIR is not enough for software, and FAIR gets you in the middle of this different levels of fairness in terms of, because you can have a PID and metadata and license and documentation, and then you can have a software that's just the executable of the software, but it's not enough because it's not accessible and archived, and you don't have the full stack of the software, dependencies, etc. This is just to let you kind of ponder upon when you think about reusability. And our last activity is what you always wanted to ask and never dare to. So I feel like you did dare to ask and say some things here during this full session. But Stick to reusability. Yes, yes, Herbert, stick to reusability, please. So if you have have any question, please bring. So in the slides it says turn to your neighbor, but we don't have time to do that, to kind of collect questions and ask yourselves. So if someone here has a question, please raise that. Yes, I see one here. It's also on the online document for the online participants.
Yes, hi. It's not necessarily linked to what we didn't want to ask, but I would just like to point out another element in reusability. It's long-term preservation, because this is also something that we encounter as a problem. So even if we have good documentation, some data still cannot be open after 10 years. So I think that's also something that we don't really see in FAIR principles. And I'm wondering if anyone wants to touch that.
Aha.
Cheers, Irena. No, and that came up just now, and we know, like a little internal discussion. It is a question of that, like retention is hugely important. It's there today. Will it be there tomorrow? Is a hugely important baseline for this whole thing. Will those bits have integrity? It's hugely important baseline. But will somebody be looking after this for a community over time is one thing. The example I just brought up with our particular stuff was that we are in a situation where economic data can become social science data, can become historical data over time. So it's not even just the cross-disciplinary now. Fair plus time is a real thing, and maintaining fairness in the context of changing technologies and changing communities is a huge part of that preservation challenge. Yeah.
Thank you. Next, Wim.
Yeah, so I think Hervé and I sit on the same side of the fence on long-term preservation aspects. So FAIR there is certainly not enough. And I want to be controversial and say that we have this overemphasis of FAIR at the moment, and we are ignoring other things that the research infrastructure community needs to do well to ensure that our assets are properly managed.
Thank you. I saw a question in the audience just here.
Yeah, it was not really a question. It was to try to react to.
Yeah,
indeed, I have very precise examples in astronomy or planetary science. We have spacecraft flying all over the solar system, so this data is very expensive to be retrieved. So we have to keep it for a long time, because we are not going to go back to Neptune soon. And so the way it has been set up by the NASA Planetary Archive is to have a system that ensures that the data can be read again. So there is a full bunch of metadata about how to read the actual bits that are in the file. And so that makes a lot of constraint on the file that you can submit. You need to have a file format that doesn't require a library to read it, because you cannot maintain the library forever. So, but the information about the file and how the data is organized, this you can maintain it in the long run. And so that is very good in principle, but we arrive to situations where teams are using file formats that cannot be archived. So they produce an extra file format that they never use, never test, and in the archive there is data that is not correct, and nobody ever tested it on their site. So it's not that simple. You can do many things, and sometimes there is a flow in the middle.
Thank you for that comment. So, yes, go ahead, Alex. Okay.
That's something to hear, because at CERN we have the same problem. Again, we run the accelerators, we collect all of this data. Not all of it is going to be usable in a meaningful form, right? So I think what's important, and we didn't discuss a lot of it, is that the environment in which the data has been processed that can be used is also important. So another classic joke is that we have an intern, they develop something, they say it works on my machine, and then we say, well, you know what, we're going to ship your machine on production. And that's what we do at CERN. So for example, we create VMs, like virtual machines, with the data, with the software already prepackaged, so that you can reuse it, and it should be easy enough. Again.
Ooh, solution. And last question for the what you always wanted to ask and never dare to. Last question. because we need to wrap up. Anyone wants to dare to ask a question? Ah, I see a hand in the very back. Yes, go, go, go. Quick, quick. Two hands? Oh, no. There's a...
Yeah, so we have been talking about FAIR principles and how to make, I'd call it research objects fair over the past days. So is reusability not the most important, because it also has to do with a cultural change with researchers? Because if they do not reuse software data, why do we even provide these technical solutions? And I have the feeling that findability, accessibility, interoperability, those are technical things to solve. But the reusability, really, do we need to engage more with research communities to actually get them there? Because from my own experience, I know there are disciplines who do this already, but there are so many disciplines who do not reuse, who are not, experience the reusability of research objects at the moment, and therefore do not care that much about FAIR.
Thank you for the question.
Yes.
Hervé? Yes. No? Yes?
Agree, yeah.
We agree. The panels agree. Okay. Thank you for that final question and final remark. We have 5 minutes left, and with these 5 minutes, I will ask each one of the panelists for a last comment for the future. And what now? A key takeaway towards an open science future. So I didn't, I told you that, but that's the last part. I will start with you, looking at you.
Okay, one which will probably reflect that last question a little bit more, which is if you accept the fact that, as Carol said, that perfect reproducibility is a gigantic target to hit, you need to work out what your target is below that, yeah? So reusability, for who, how, and then what for. Just work your way through those, and that involves going back through the R of FAIR and going through the fuzzy terms that are used in there, probably more fuzzy terms than others, in terms of that community, those community standards, all of those specific things, and they are, I think, probably the more social aspects of all of this, the more researcher engaged aspects of all this.
Thank you, Hervé. Elena.
So I think we have heard, well, there's really an interest, there is the need for fairness or beyond for your data, for your software, for your digital objects. The question is, how do we make sure we don't diverge too much? There will be like more standards which are accepted across the communities, that we keep this conversation going beyond FAIR impact, which other projects pick it up, and do they also talk to each other, that we like build up like a community, like a broad community with lots of opinions, lots of input, but also that not everyone reinvents their own wheel, basically.
Thank you, Elena. Daniel?
Well, regarding not reproducibility but reusability, I would like to emphasize once more the importance of documentation, in particular on usage examples, which is not addressed by the FAIR principles, but usually if you don't know, if you don't have these examples, it is often very difficult to reuse whatever you're trying to reuse. And the next time someone tells you that they share one thing following the FAIR principles, I would encourage you to ask them whether they have actually tried to reuse them themselves, or a colleague has been able to successfully reuse that resource, because I think that is the test on truly reusability.
Thank you, Daniel. Alex?
Then on my side, I think as service providers, we sort of have to think about the user experience of somebody, again, doing the work as they do it, and some of these things just happening in the background for them. And basically building our services that we manage to automatically capture all this reusability, all this metadata as researchers do the work as they do. Right? Part of it is also, this is attacking from the one side of the technical, let's say the infrastructure side, On the other side, there's the education part. So again, you learn by doing. So as we said, as many of you have students, you educate them, you teach them why this is important, and that's the way. There's no better way.
Thank you, Alex. Last.
Yeah, so there's about 150 odd certified trustworthy repositories in the entire world. That's sort of like the very tip of the iceberg, because re3 data, fair sharing, COAR, and so on list about 3,500 data repositories each. So not even 5% are certified. And that is based on top of an estimated maybe 35,000 or more institutional data repositories spread across universities and institutes across the world. They take care of these aspects of reusability, long-term preservation, all the things that we've been talking about. But it's really not enough to ensure that we make any progress. So the challenge ahead of us is quite enormous, I would say, to entrench these good practices into a much, much larger, orders of magnitude larger corpus of data repositories worldwide.
Thank you, Wim. And with that, I'm going to thank our panelists. Please a big clap for our panelists. And also thank the organizing of the session. We have Mike from Dance. Thank you very much for organizing that, please.
And stay here for the usual picture. So a few announcements. So we now have a break and the marketplace adopters pitches again. So we have 3. You'll hear Saadet Bozaki, Heinrich Wittmann, and Jan Lefranc down in the foyer. And an important reminder, those who haven't signed the presents for today, please stop at the desk and do so. We'll be back at 11. Enjoy the coffee break. Take a picture? Yeah.
Dreamer, I shine my shoes. Oh, women, getting low. Try to find the seed of dawn, but I can hardly wait that long. No way, no way. Now watch out.
People, we are PowerPoint free. So, woo! And that, well, not in this session. So join us on Menti for those questions from the shy in the audience and from the online. And so we're going to start off with Natalie, actually. And she's going to try and address in a little 5-minute pitch about those first few questions that I had on the slide. So the floor is yours.
Carol tried to keep the scope of the questions really small. What should we have done? What can we do? What's missing? I'm going to talk to 3 things. So, and I thought about these questions before I arrived, but really I've shaped them over listening to all of the discussions over the last week here. So I'll talk about adoption, about culture, and about a kind of international footnote, because I've moved from being in Europe at the Digital Repository of Ireland to Canada in the last couple of years, so I have a different perspective on how open science is being addressed. Okay, so on the first point, this is around adoption. Is this a good level? Can you hear me? Yeah, all right. There was a joke that was going through yesterday's session. I think it was around the A time of the day, and it was also in one of the sessions outside, around don't look at the fine print. Okay, so who was the person in the room that kept talking about the fine print?
That was Yanis.
Right. And it was a funny joke because it was saying, be careful, we're applying this to these cases, but there's a whole bunch of reasons why this might actually fit. And this does make a lot of sense. There are some edge cases where if you were to take every single one of those things into consideration, you'd never make any kind of progress whatsoever. However, it did start me thinking about edge cases. I used to be working in cultural heritage, which isn't always the hottest topic in data circles. We're a little bit outside of of some of the main discussions. So I started thinking about how many cases really are atypical and what is the atypical. And so to me, one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now, Carol wanted us to address this, is how do we move towards widespread adoption? And I heard quite a few people mention that in different contexts in the final panels over the last couple of days or during IDCC as well earlier in the week. We are working on so many different things, and then we have some great pilots and we have some use cases implemented. And then there are a few things that have developed quite broadly. But trying to ensure more widespread adoption of what we already have developed, I think is something we really need to pay attention to. Otherwise, we're only going to be working in very small groups. And so how do we address at scale what we're trying to do without losing sight of our larger goals? And that's really hard to do, because usually when you work on things and make them better, you make them more precise over time, but that starts to cut off the things that are on the edge. So that's the point on adoption. The next is around the culture of FAIR, because I think this is really important. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about research culture and the importance of the cultural aspects in the Turning FAIR into Reality report, which was 2018. And now we're facing a moment, I'm just going to start talking about it because I'm living right above them, but it's happening everywhere in the world, that the culture around the discussions we're having and the kind of political climate is changing. And that is having an impact, and I'm not sure what the longer impact would be. So how do we retain FAIR within our research communities as a common goal despite the changing politics? And I want to develop this a bit, because one of the things that started to concern me 2-3 years ago was this growing concern around research security. And I started hearing things that sounded to me like threats to the goals of open science. So in other words, whatever we're trying to achieve in open science, we have to take a second look at that because of research security concerns. And to give a really concrete example of that, to me, is the change in the semantic meaning, the semantics around this statement. We need to treat our data as a national asset, okay? So what drew me into open science, what really got me interested in it in the first place, there's two things. One very philosophical, one very pragmatic, I'll tell you both. But the really big picture things were the desire for openness, for transparency in science, for increased trust, to be able to build on one another's work instead of reinventing the wheel. During COVID, we saw the importance of this in terms of data. The idea that we could make better discoveries together, that there should be an openness to the public, should be able to access those results. It was all of these kinds of very high principled ideas, plus the ability to get EU money to build better national archives, repositories, tools, and this sort of thing. So it was really attractive to be able to access those funds, but the reason those funds were and are available, I mean, I was talking to Ingrid, there's something like 40 projects working on EOSC right now, is because the principles of open science were politically aligned with what was happening politically, right? So now, when I think of this phrase, data as a national asset, the questions I'm hearing around it, or the way that's formed, is about protecting our data from foreign influence, right? Or whichever foreign you deem is problematic in the moment, and that, as we can see, changed very quickly. So now I'm hearing DIRC, speaking of weird-sounding acronyms, so dual-use research of concern, right? What will people do with our data that it wasn't intended for and may be problematic? So there's this move towards protectionism. And I've always been motivated by the principles behind open science, but now I'm wondering, do I need to shift the way that I'm selling this within my research environment? And I resent that because I want to sell it on the high level, progressive, positive principles that have motivated me since day one. But I think maybe I need to look more towards questions of efficiency and these sorts of things, changing the goal. Okay, and the final one, and this one is briefer than the others, because I've been ignoring the clock and I'm probably over. Carol asked me to speak to an international perspective. Well, I mean, that's huge. So I can't really speak to a broad one, but I can tell you what I've noticed in my shift back from working very much in the European environment, in Ireland, but very much in Europe, and those two went together, into the Canadian one. obviously, the approaches, the progress, what's being focused on in a broader open science sense and around FAIR in particular are different in different contexts. But it's also the coordination of thinking and organizing around it that's not necessarily the same everywhere. So I was sort of intellectually brought up in the open science principles here, where in Europe, where we look at a variety of pillars and how they operate together. So if you really want to progress things like the sharing of data, you also have to look at the reform of research assessment and rewards and incentives, that there are various different pieces. Everyone thinks the other one has to start first, and we all know that we all have to try to progress together without necessarily knowing that the other side's going to happen, but that it's a larger picture, right? And also the EOSC is seen as the goal, and there's always, there's always been ongoing jokes of what is the EOSC, are we there or are we not? But it does provide this organizing goal for how to progress towards the things that we want to do with FAIR and open science. This isn't the case elsewhere. I see a lot of things happening in Canada kind of on the ground, a lot of people working, but not necessarily looking at this larger picture as what's motivating them. They're more specific concerns. And I think that's really curious. I found it quite surprising. So yes, I think that's all I was going to say.
That was incredibly thought-provoking and really, really inspiring. And we're going to carry on now with the international perspective with Andrew, answering from the other end of the world.
The other end of the world, indeed. So it seems like it's obligatory at this event to say I was also at the Lorenz workshop. Fortunately, I can say I was at the Lorenz workshop. I think I came in on the final day when they were just finalizing things. I mostly remember a series of terrible puns, one of which I saw on an earlier slide. Fairport Convention, I think, was one of the phrases that was being used early on. But it's clearly something that's apparently taken off. Didn't expect it to gain the momentum it has, to be honest. So my perspective is informed by being part of the international data community through the Research Data Alliance, but I also work for a national digital research infrastructure provider that's been advocating for FAIR for the last decade in Australia. Having said that, I try and stay up with what's going on in EOSC, but there's only so much it's possible to do from the other side of the world when the meetings start at midnight and run through to 7 in the morning for me. So I'm sure that there's subtleties and complexities that I am blissfully unaware of. So having said that, Carol asked me to be provocative. So I have 4 provocative questions. To start with, what do I think FAIR's achieved? I think it's achieved excellent awareness among research and research infrastructure providers. So Australia's 2024 National Digital Research Infrastructure Strategy talks about the importance of ensuring, quote, ensuring the ever-growing body of Australia's research data is as fair and care, doesn't actually make sense as English, but they mean responding to the care principles, as possible, which is going to offer greater efficiency in fostering deep collaboration. So this is written into the guidelines for how we do national digital research infrastructure. So that's great for research and research infrastructure folks, but it seems to have relatively low awareness among researchers, at least in my part of the world. I don't have any real data for that. I've got lots of anecdata for it, but it just seems that you ask them about FAIR and they go, what? So my provocative question here is, do researchers actually need to know about FAIR? And the example I'm going to give you is, how much do you know about the standards that govern the electricity that shows up in your house? There are people who worry about this, conferences about it. You just plug your light in and expect it to work. So I would challenge the idea that researchers need to know that FAIR exists, even as an acronym. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be working on FAIR. I think that we should absolutely be working on a tagline we used on a project I was associated with a long time ago was make the right thing easy. I would now actually rework that. I would say make the right thing easier. That is easier than what they're doing at the moment. So that if you like, the barrier is heading in the direction you want. It's sort of easy to slide down into doing it the right way. and hide the underlying complexity, and a lot of people have talked about that already. So that's my first provocative question. Do researchers need to know about FAIR? One of the things that struck me yesterday was the huge amount of work that was on show. And I worry about that amount of work. Now, one could say maybe it's just envy at the level of resourcing that's been poured into all of the projects. And that's there, believe me. I'm deeply envious of the amount of resources that Europe is expending on this. But I also worry about the amount of complexity. Now, some of the complexity is inherent in the problem domain. And yet I know myself that when I get a problem, I love exploring the edge cases. Natalie's already talked about the edge cases. I'm the kind of person who sits in a room planning a project and wants to think about all of the weird edge cases that we might see. And I worry that some of the stuff I saw yesterday was people exploring edge cases that they're never going to see in reality. Often, the 20% solution is going to meet 80% of the needs. And so my second provocative question is the search for the perfect becoming the enemy of delivering the good, or indeed the good enough? And it may well be that a significant subset of some of the stuff that I saw yesterday will meet most of the needs of most of the people most of the time. Now, that sucks if you're responsible for some of those projects exploring the edge cases. I've run those projects. I understand where it's coming from, but maybe we need to wind it back a little bit. No one's killed me yet. Can I keep going?
No, I'm all for this.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Okay, third provocative question. The power of the work that I saw exposed yesterday is the generality of a lot of the solutions. So there was a whole lot of really nice work looking at general solutions that would apply across a range of problem domains. But generality comes at a cost, a complexity cost, an interaction with users cost, a sustainability cost. Now, my organization is trying to solve this particular problem by not focusing on everything, but by focusing on 3 thematic research data commons domains, inspired, as it turns out, by the S3 science clusters from some years ago. So we're not trying to do everything, we're just trying to do a smallish number of things. And we're also not trying to use a phrase of one of my Australian colleagues, fix the past, we're focusing on fixing the future. So we recognize that the data that we've got now is not particularly fair, not particularly well described, doesn't have the right contextual metadata. We are never going to have the resources to fix the past, except in particular domains where you really need those observational data sets. So we're much more focused on how do we build things into our systems to fix the future so that the problem at least gets less bad over time. So my third provocative question is, rather than trying to boil the ocean, should we be focusing on just warming up some very specific puddles? And then last one, I've been doing this kind of stuff for 20 years now in a variety of domains. And something that's occurring to me late in my career is the sustainability of the work we do. I have run projects that started and died. I've run build it and hope they'll come projects, and they kind of didn't. And so I saw some amazing work being demonstrated at this event, as I've said already. But I worry about what's going to happen when the money tap gets turned off and the project ends. And I've seen that happen for projects that I've led, and I've seen it happen to other projects. Turning projects into boring infrastructure, boring middleware, as David Abramson, one of my Australian colleagues, would say, is really hard. And sustaining boring infrastructure over the long term is even harder. And I don't have a magic wand here. The only thing I could think of to close on was riffing a little bit on the IDDO example that was given to us earlier in the week. What can we learn from the infrastructures that have sustained themselves over time? Not even just the digital research infrastructures, infrastructures in general. What is it about those that we can look at and go, okay, that's how you build for the next 20, the next 200 years?
That's fantastic and resonated. You could be my new best friend.
Already?
No, you are actually. Even you've gone higher up the hierarchy. Awesome. And now, Karel can now speak from a completely non-complex point of view, the EOSC Association, and that is doing generic or specific solutions. We'll find out, because that's some great food for thought there, Karel. Your thoughts, please.
Well, thank you. I'll try and address the questions, and the advantage of being third is that you can reflect a little bit on the things that have been said and give some answers to the questions that came. The question is, where are we? Well, we're on the way. That's simple. Huh? And how long have we been on the way? Well, personally, I've been on the way since 2013, when I became the chair of the supervisory board of DTL, Dutch Tech Center for Life Sciences, who was one of the organizations that started the Lawrence Conference in 2014. I was not at the conference, unfortunately, but I was at the second one 10 years later. And if we look at where we are compared to any other thing that was invented in 2013, we have made enormous progress by this, let's say, acronym and the principles. So where do we go? Well, I tend to say, I said this 2.5 years or 2.25 years ago during a European national tripartite event. If in 2040, 50% of the research output would be as fair as possible at that time, I would be very happy. Now, there's a few boundary conditions. If I say research output, I'm talking about worldwide. I'm not talking about Europe only. Otherwise, it's of no use. Secondly, as fair as possible. Fair is a set of principles, it's not standards, and thus it varies between 0% fair and 100% fair, you could say. Except that the 100% is moving because we know more and more about fair, and we developed standards to a certain extent. So if at that time things would be for 50% as fair as possible, I would be really impressed. Think about the other things. Look at open access. For me, this started sort of 2003 in Berlin. And where are we now? 2025, it's not finished. Is there a way back? There's no way back. And the same is with FAIR. Could you imagine that we say, well, open access was a mistake, let's forget about it, and let's go back to the history? No way. Could you imagine that we say, well, FAIR was not a good acronym and the principles are wrong, let's forget about it and go our own way as we always did? I don't believe that's a possibility either. Both of them have had a lot of resistance. The resistance in open access came from the publishers. That was very clear and still comes from the publishers. The resistance in the principles of FAIR come from culture. You mentioned it. It's a cultural thing. They come from the lack of training, and they come from the work that's involved in order to make things as fair as possible. So in this case, the resistance comes from within rather than from outside, but it is resistance nevertheless. Not organized resistance, but it is not easy to get there. So the question is then, what is needed in order to get further or to get to this 2040 goal I mentioned, is perseverance, patience, and power to push. And I'm sure that we will bring those things at various levels, at various moments, at various ways of doing that. Are projects going to help was one of the questions in the last set. Yes, I think they do sometimes. We're not going to build the EOSC Federation, and not the EOSC, but the EOSC Federation with projects. We have realized that already a long time ago, therefore there was this procurement, therefore we are now building the EOSC Federation with EOSC nodes, candidates nodes, we call them, and that is going to be a real infrastructure. Yes, it's going to be a boring infrastructure, but if it brings value, if people are happy with that boring infrastructure, it will persist, because if they comply to that boring infrastructure, they may also have a sustainable future themselves. So I see two types of projects. One, that are closely linked to the federation itself with implementable results directly in the federation. And two, those that are exploring new territories in the domain of FAIR and everything around it. Data as a national asset. There, FAIR is very important because the A in FAIR is about access, as you know. So start a discussion about access. If they want to limit the access to the country, start a discussion about it rather than pushing back and saying, well, data is not a national asset. It is, of course, a national asset to a certain extent, but the question is, what of it is national, what of it can be international? And we are pushing to make as much as possible international. The organizing goal of the EOSC Federation is exactly that, across disciplines and across borders. As I said, FAIR is not a standard, so it's between 0 and 100%, and therefore every researcher should know about it. Every researcher should know what the acronym stands for, that the data have to be findable, that they have to think about accessibility, that the interoperability should be improved, and that they have to think about reusing data, who can, who cannot, and why. So I believe all the researchers should know about it, and I've worked on that as a rector magnificus in the Delft University by talking every 2 or 3 weeks to 25 of my researchers, 1,100 staff members, about FAIR, about the discussion, what do you do with your data, where do you get them? And I think that is what is needed, that we talk about this, and this is what we do, not only in projects, but also outside projects. I agree with Andrew. Only in exceptional cases should you make data fair retrospectively. So forget about the past. In general, only in very exceptional cases you should try and for those data where it's absolutely necessary to make them somewhat fair. But the rest is more about the future than about the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that's terrific. And Pantelis, you have the honour of going last. And after this, after the statement, I'll open out to questions in the audience, because I'm sure you're all dying to ask something.
Well, the disadvantage of being the fourth one, after 3 actual experts in the field, is that I can only say boring things, right? And repetitions. So, in fact, yeah, many of the things that I had noted to talk about have already been raised, but maybe just to give some perspective from where I come from. So, the kind of view we have on the EOSC initiative from the policy unit I work in DGRTD. Indeed, we are now working within a political environment that is rapidly changing, and we see the influence of these changes also in the way we can push forward the work around the European Open Science Cloud. Natalie already mentioned the discussion on security. So this becomes an increasingly relevant priority that is also permeating research policy. Research security is an issue that is increasingly relevant, and we see also questions around what role could EOSC have in addressing some of the security questions on research in Europe. And indeed, this is not, at first sight at least, an agenda point that would be fully aligned with the open science philosophy, let's say. But we don't necessarily see this as being contradicting, research security and open science. Especially the FAIR agenda has always been an agenda about having the right control and the ways that you can actually manage and kind of have a trustworthy and secure management of the data and the research outputs. And this is something that is not far away from what the research security actually requires from our initiatives in Europe. The other increasingly relevant priority that is coming also and influencing EOSC is competitiveness. Probably you have been familiar with the Draghi report that was published a few months ago. Before that, it was the Letta report. And there again, we don't see this as being a priority that is necessarily outside the scope of EOSC. We think that EOSC can have a very significant role in contributing to competitiveness. The Letta report is actually devoting a very good part as part of the 5th freedom that Mr. Letta is proposing in advancing open science in Europe, and also developing what they call a European knowledge commons, which, if we see the description in the report, pretty much aligns with what we are trying to build with EOSC. So we see the right hooks there, the right anchors in the overall political landscape for EOSC remaining pertinent. And the other increasingly relevant priority in research policy is AI. AI is being increasingly receiving attention, and also now this attention will translate into funding in one way or another. And again, EOSC and the FAIR agenda have a significant role to play, and we have to see how we can actually position this work here within this broader agenda. Now, except for the political priorities, there is also the need to see how EOSC is placed within the overall landscape of new priorities, new initiatives that are being developed at European level. We mentioned AI. AI, as I said, is coming also with funding and with new initiatives. There is this launch of AI factories. On the side of computing, there is EuroHPC. EuroHPC is surrounded by data spaces that there is this broad digital initiative in Europe to develop data spaces in different thematic areas. We like to see that EOSC could eventually become one of these initiatives specifically for research. But of course, all these are kind of starting to occupy now their own space in the landscape. AI and AI factories will also have relevance for data space, a role for research. We have seen, for example, the European health data space that has also specific link to health research data. So to try to see where EOSC finds its right place, its right space within this emerging landscape is a very relevant question for us. And of course, we do see that EOSC does have its right space, and this is, of course, the space that is specifically on the data, right? So EOSC is actually an initiative that is around data and surrounding services, of course, making data fair, making data higher quality, high value. And this continues to be, in our view at least, the strategic asset, let's say, the strategic aspect of EOSC that we need to put forward in the future and find the right links with the other initiatives. Now, regarding where we move forward, I think I very much agree with what has been said before. I think, Tommy, you mentioned yesterday adoption. So we have been, at least from the European Commission side, looking into our support to the EOSC initiative in the past years in a more kind of exploratory approach where we will be funding different projects, developing different solutions. And we are now trying to move towards a more consolidating phase where we want to see some of these solutions being adopted and reaching down to the researcher. I think, Roxana, you mentioned also the focus to the researcher, to the end user of all these services that needs to be more brought in the front end now. And in that approach, of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that EOSC should be something that every single researcher in Europe needs to know about. I think you mentioned, Carol, that EOSC can be the underwear. If you see it, it's something wrong about it, right? And this is what you also mentioned, Adriu. So yes, that is correct. I mean, it's not, we don't see it in a way that EOSC should be something that a researcher would have to deal with in their daily life. But there should be some kind of a backbone or a kind of a back-end infrastructure that facilitates the day-to-day work of researchers. And probably we are not there yet. So this is the thing that probably we will have to focus more in the future. Of course, development continues to be a relevant factor. We will always have to invest in innovation and research for further developing the services. And probably this is what we will be trying to achieve through the Federation, to develop a space where results can consolidate, can be hopefully operated in a longer term with a longer perspective. Of course, this is not only for the European Union to support. European Union money is only 10% of the money in research. Most of the money comes from the countries. So we have to go back to our countries and raise the relevance of EOSC and what we're doing here, also within the ministries, within the national administration, so that they can also come up and provide their support to this. We very much count on this support, especially for the deployment, the adoption, the operationalization, making things boring, as you say, in the long term.
Thank you very much. That was very compelling. And I'm seeing some themes emerging, this notion of the national role and the national potential barriers that are coming up within an international context. I'm seeing something around maturity of the exciting first 10 years of let 1,000 flowers bloom, and let's try to experiment to a more mature position of, well, some things have to be dropped and other things have to be concentrated on. We have to go to a sustainable and adoptive kind of approach with scale. The new innovations around AI, being able to perhaps help with that. So a wider perspective. And I think this notion of good enough and focusing not so much on perfect golden generic solutions, but trying to do something useful that's just enough that you can then demonstrate is adopted and build on that is a kind of a future movement. I got this general perspective, trying to reduce complexity a little bit. So questions, and people who know that if there are no questions, I'm going to ask them to give one. Yes, there she is, Roxy. Yeah. I did put some plants in the audience.
I will get to the question at some point. I just wanted to make some reference points to what has been said. First of all, my heart aches when I hear boring or boring infrastructure. It hurts my heart a lot because I think that's the most wonderful thing, only because the good infrastructure is the one that, as you said, is not visible to the end users in the end, and this is what we are trying to do. Now I would like to remind us something, or it's very deeply concerning my heart, that for me, and I think this is what I love about this community here, I see people who care about the problems, and I wish that we try to forget what party has we joined, meaning I don't care if I'm EOSC or anything else, because Pantelis, I know I tend to have this fight inside of me, like ideology versus reality, and I know we are living in a highly political world, but what you have said about where EOSC will land between other data spaces, this is the complexity we are adding to ourselves, right? Because in the end, I think what we want to do, and we are also sometimes in the other data spaces or other initiatives, we want to move things forward for the sake of development, for the sake of efficiency, for the sake of a better world, right? Unicorns, rainbows, and everything. And I do accept the fact that maybe, and sorry, Carol, for that, but I do, even though I'm also very involved in this for a very long time, I do accept the fact that maybe EOSC will not work. But it's not about the brand, it's about the knowledge. That relates for me with the sustainability. I don't care that much if my tools, and it happens and it's been frustrating that my tools don't live because of the sustainability issues, but what lives is the knowledge, is the problems that we've been able to answer. And also to all of us, I think, for me, the main problem in the project is not the lack of sustainability for our results, it's the lack of transparency, because we cannot fail. And please remember, we're coming from the academic world. Failure is such an important input. If something doesn't work, just say it out loud, because in my case, one of the biggest problems is I'm continuing the project, and I'm supposed to build something on top of something that is supposedly there, and it's not, right? And this is something that stops us from growing as fast as possible. And I know this is the reality, the political issue, the money, blah, blah, blah. Of course, we need to live with that. And this brings me to the last part and to the question that I also hate the edge cases, but I think that in something we are trying to do here, which is a kind of a revolution in science making. It's a new scientific research system. The edge cases is the last problem. The first thing, when I've started with a very small and very straightforward use case, then you see that if you want to be better at it, more mature, more professional, there are new pillars emerging. That is not only about the user friendliness of the UI for the data discovery. It's about the fact if the user will be able to share the data, then you get the research advancement, then you get to the systems of the research careers, then you get to the point, and you get to the publishers. Everything is connected in the end. So yes, we can start with the very straightforward use cases, with a very straightforward outputs. And I think we have done it in our silos especially, but now the challenge is that we want to break the barriers. We want to see, because we know it's true, that one discipline can support others a lot, the same with the countries, especially that science or research should be cross boundaries by default. I also believe in that, even though the asset thing is also right. But the main problem I am having personally when deciding how far to push, and I wanted to have your opinion on that, is innovation versus user satisfaction, I call it. Because on one hand, we want our users to be happy with our development, but we are also in an innovative world, right? And I tend to think that I'm smarter than someone else, unfortunately. So I have to ask myself a question: how much our development should be focusing on the situation as it is right now versus how much should we, because we know that, for example, the crosswalks, it's super hard from the user perspective, right? But it has a great potential. So should we leave it for now because people are not ready yet, or should we push it as a new cool thing to do? So I would like to know your perspective on innovation versus reality and, you know, people's habits at the very moment. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that, for our extra panelist, for the splendid speech and the question. Thank you, Roxy. Who would like to pick up Roxy's question about innovation versus user satisfaction? The user is, you know, knows best except for when they don't.
So I'm reminded of the quote from Henry Ford, which is, I'm sure you've all heard this one, you know, if we'd asked what our users what they wanted, we would give them a faster horse. Yeah. And I see quite a lot of faster horses out there, I guess. The challenge is that in the world that we operate in, you actually sometimes need to show the users what the future would look like before they understand why they might want it. And so I think there is absolutely a role for working with users to say, okay, what are the problems you're facing now? And what you mostly hear is what they don't like about the technologies they're currently using. If you say to them, you know, imagine the future, you mostly get a list of things they hate about what they now have. So there's a trick in taking that and thinking, okay, how can we build something that looks like it's going to respond to their needs, and then show it to the users and say, is that the kind of thing you're looking for? And sometimes they'll look at you and they'll go, no. And sometimes they'll go, oh yes, I want one of those. And then it's worth putting the effort in to start turning it into reliable infrastructure. But often until you show them something, they don't understand that that's what they need.
So that kind of speaks to the failure issue, because you have to do a whole bunch of things that don't work before you show the thing that really does. I think Natalie wants to make a comment.
Sure. Well, okay. There is no easy answer to that because the process is dialectical. Sorry, I'll just throw that out there. It's a dialectical process. You have to look at these things in relation to each other over and over again. I think something that I found really, that struck me about how well something like the Fair Impact project has done over the last number of years is that it has addressed both what, I'll borrow a phrase from RDA, the social and the technical bridges, right? That we have to create in order to move this whole world forward. So you need to constantly be looking at how these relate to one another in order to make any kind of progress. And I'm going to give a really funny, I hope this fits in my head, it makes sense, story. I used to really love PCs, like a personal computer, because I thought I could really get in there and fix it. I knew how to do it. And people said, oh, Macs are better. And then I resisted. And then finally I started using a Mac and I realized, oh, I don't have to know how to fix it because it doesn't get broken the way that the PCs do. And I eventually, now I never ever want to look at a PC again because I don't want to remember how to do those things. So what's the answer to that? Is it better to have the one where there's all of the awareness? I mean, this comes back to other questions too about, do the researchers need to know what each of the FAIR principles means and to have a very clear understanding, or do they need to be able to do the things that enable those principles behind it? So it's always a back and forth, which it's not a very satisfying answer, but we can't really lose sight of either of those goals, I think is what I would say there.
How might you frame Roxy's question from the point of view of what is moving forward in Europe? I know, so we often say, oh, the researchers, but are these the right users that we're really aiming at? I mean, EOSC is it really for the researchers, or is it for the research infrastructure builders who serve the researchers?
Well, it starts with a business-to-business activity between the builders and among each other. But ultimately, we do this, of course, for research. We don't do it for the individuals, but the individuals will benefit. So EOSC is not for the researchers, it's for research, and researchers do research, so the researchers benefit from a well-functioning EOSC. The EOSC Federation is a boring, let's say, underwear, which you normally don't see. But underwear can also be very exciting and very limited.
That's too much information, Carl. I will never be able to look at you quite the same way, but rescue us.
I'm not taking a stand here.
Pantelis, did you want to make a remark? Ideally, not about underwear or lingerie.
I mean, just following up on Roxana's comment, right? I fully resonate with your comment about EOSC. That we are not dogmatic about EOSC, right? We shouldn't. I mean, the way I was trying to approach this is that, in my view, EOSC is a kind of it proposes an organizing principle of our work, and there is also other organizing principles around, and we need to see how EOSC continues to, as an organizing principles, not as a specific instrument or structure, right? The way we approach what are the important questions that we need to address, the way we approach, the way we fund and support these developments, how this evolves over future within a changing landscape. And this is what we need to continuously refine and adapt, right? So, and my understanding is that the questions that we're trying to address under the EOSC agenda, let's say, in the broad sense, and also the way that we are trying to address these questions continues to remain relevant. Of course, as I said, tomorrow it may not. Is the FAIR principles is the only thing we need to do today? Maybe not. Maybe more things need to be done, or maybe tomorrow the FAIR principles become relevant because there is some other organizing principle that. A set of principles that allows us to move forward faster. However, we are in the middle of in the making of something, and especially now that we have all these sets of results that have been developed in the past years, and we feel that this transition towards deployment, adoption, reaching out the end user, maybe through infrastructures, but in the end it's for the benefit of the end user. This is something that it's worth investing in the near future, at least.
Okay, I'm storing up questions in my head, but I think, so Danny and then Sarah. Is there anybody at the back who's got a question lined up? Wave your hand if you have. Okay.
Still awake?
It's Danny.
Thank you. I like what you said about data as a national asset, but is it versus data as an international asset, right? So doesn't making it a national asset also make it more susceptible to who is in power at the moment? And I mention this because obviously in the States now we are seeing data sets, national data sets that are going away. So I would like to know if you can elaborate a little bit on this. And also I had a comment for Andrew about what you said on, do researchers need to know about FAIR? I think this is a very good question, but I do not think they need to know about FAIR, but I think, or what I believe is, shouldn't they know about the practices associated with FAIR? For example, in many cases when I teach the course on fairness, many do not know that they should add a license to the resources that they create, or how should they structure their documentation. This is so it's something that they didn't know that they had to do, and that maybe they should do, and putting these questions in their minds is, okay, yeah, I think you're right. So
Karel's going to first respond.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to both what you said. The first thing with respect to the national asset, my emphasis would be on discuss it, because ignoring it is not going to help. And yes, the tide is not going in the right direction. I see that. But the tide will also change in the future if you just wait long enough and are patient. And in the meantime, don't forget about it. In my phrasing, I would say researchers have to be aware about FAIR. That's something else than know the details on the FAIR principles out of their head or something like that. That's not useful. They should be aware about FAIR, exactly as you say, in order to do the things that they have to do properly with respect to the data, or have to be properly done with their data by somebody else. Not necessarily the researchers themselves have to do all of that. And then I would like to add to that, with respect to the EOSC Federation, they don't have to be aware. They have to be aware where they can work with their data, where they can find their data, and that organization has to be part of the Federation one way or another. But the researchers have to be aware about FAIR, not about the underwear.
That's Yes.
But I didn't come up with that.
Sadly, I did. It's my fault. So Natalie, I wanted to pick up the point about national, because the security issue has always been framed as we have to secure our data sets as national assets against hostile other countries. But actually, the enemy is within. That it's the country that itself that's closing these things down, and it's not just happening in the country that's below you. It's happening in many other countries too, and looks like that's actually a movement. So what do we do about this in the open science movement? Are we going to kind of batten down the hatches, have international rescue, and wait for better times, or what should we be doing?
God, but I would love to be able to answer that question. That would be great. It's really challenging, and your point, it fits exactly with what I was saying. It's just another kind of example. The issue is, okay, so I work in, one of the areas I work in is FAIR, interested in that, but really I'm working in research infrastructures. And we even heard it from the Commission right here, that it should be the member states, right, that are paying for things. It's only 10% that comes from Europe, Europe being seen in this case, I would say, as an international kind of body, although it's a select grouping of international body. So I don't know, how do we create things that we both have some sense of fiduciary responsibility and control over, which we need, while also making them open so that they're more flexible to respond to this kind of changing environment. If funding is coming nationally for the research infrastructures, that's a reality, right? So when I said I'm seeing this change in the way that data as a national asset is viewed, it's not necessarily my thinking is changing. There seems to be a tide of change in this way towards the research security concern. But you're right, if it's coming from within, is there something that we can do against that? You know, digital preservation principles always talk about having either more than one copy or, you know, things in other places so they're not on their own. Maybe that's one of the things to work against it. But, you know, I woke up to the news, CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, saying Canadian researchers stay up overnight to download CDC data sets. And we're seeing that kind of thing all over. I'm sure they felt very nationally proud. We're having a bit of a moment of that in doing it. But I don't know, you know, do we try to create infrastructures where there's a shared sense of responsibility so no one can take them down? Then what do you do when things do need to be taken down because they're problematic in other kinds of, I don't know, fascist ways, if that happens? It's so complicated. Yeah. Anyone else want to solve it?
Andrew's going to.
I'm absolutely not going to solve it. So I'm reminded of a project started at Stanford University, I think, which is still in significant use in the library world, called Locks. Lots of copies, keep stuff safe. And I'm beginning to think that until now, I was going to say we, that's not fair. I have been intellectually lazy, and I've assumed that we could rely on large, well-funded Western democracies, air quotes democracies, to act as the trusted location for particular kinds of data. And I'm now beginning to wonder whether that mindset is actually saying, I want to accept a whole lot of single points of failure. Yeah. And I think what we're seeing at the moment in the US is a single point of failure that is coming to bite us. And that rather than thinking about, so this is easy for me to say, I don't have any money, but rather than thinking about national sovereignty, we should be thinking about national responsibility.
I think that's a very interesting point. And one of the things I wanted to ask Karel, so when I asked my colleagues in various different S3s what question they would really like to ask, here's the question. So we have, with the projects that we've just been hearing about for the last few days, with our S3s for the last 15 years and so on, done exactly this. We've done collective responsibility, funded by the Commission often, but also co-funded by national activities to build shared responsibility for our assets, our databases, our registries, our tools, and so on. But the EOSC association framing, the federation framing, is around thematic and national. So it goes back to, well, that's actually orthogonal to what we've actually produced, because I run a database that's actually multi-institutional, multinational, multi-thematic. So who's the governance? How will the governance work when you have a national framing for the governance of the association, when we have an international framing for the management of the actual services? It's an easy question.
Well, I don't see the conflict, to be honest. First of all, I would like to stress again that the word thematic or national or domain specific or whatever addition to a node is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. Any node, any EOSC node is welcome as long as it contributes something to the federation. I don't care where it comes from, whether it comes from a national initiative, a thematic initiative, an international initiative, all of them are welcome. Yes, we need a governance structure in the node. You cannot talk to somebody that doesn't have an address. You cannot talk to somebody that is unknown, that is vague. So that is needed. But apart from that, nothing else is needed, and there's no requirements on national, thematic, or whatever. So it's not, I don't see the contradiction.
We'll take that offline. Okay, so I've now got Sarah, and then it's Wim. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. So I've been doing this work since quite, 10 years, 15 years now, and thanks a lot, because I really believe that if European world would be managed by researchers, we would live in a better world. That said, my question is, we all talk the same language here, we all agree, we just wonder how to do FAIR, but not why. But outside, there are other entities, there are the private industries or other private entities that have a power of data, which are not following these principles, or that we are not managing them in the same way. I've heard, my ears, a representative of a funding agency telling, we don't care about open science, we need just data to be fast, we need the models to be ready to use. So my question is, are we missing an actor in this discussion, and can the absence of the data providers, all type, think of the transportation industry or whatever, they can provide data, but they cannot follow the same principles. Can this compromise the way we do open science? Not really, or
who wants to pick up that point? You talked about data spaces, Pantelis, that speaks a little bit to that, because that's a commercially driven activity.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And it raises a lot of issues, right? Once you open to the private sector, then it's not the same game anymore. They're different. Of course, we're talking about data that are proprietary in that case. However, at the same time, also coming from the private sector itself, they see an interest in having some of their practices following the FAIR principles, in the way they organize their data internally. And they also see an interest in maybe federating or kind of contributing some of this data in a broader pool, right? So this is what probably was some of the motives behind these other data spaces that are hopefully being developed now within the European Union. And most of them are actually not about public actors, they're also about private actors. So we have a manufacturing data space, there is a transport, a mobility data space, and there the aim is actually to bring closer also private actors to have this, their data shared, the data that they would be finding useful to share, in order to also facilitate kind of, those industries in a sense, right? Now, how this will eventually link with our work in EOSC is a good question. I don't have an answer, but we do see already at this early stage, because most of these data spaces are at an early stage, some obvious links. For example, the European Health Data Space is a data space that has an obvious link with research, the secondary use of data coming from the health sector, and the Green Deal data space, I guess, would also be an obvious candidate for us to kind of try to see how we interconnect. In practice, how this would work, we have to, I think we are still at early stages.
So there's also the commercial role of, in the research community around publishers, their businesses. Also, we had in yesterday's panel a lively debate about the role of companies like Microsoft and Google in the infrastructure that we use. So we all use GitHub. Everybody's mentioning GitHub. That's Microsoft. So where do you see the role of those in our conversations? Because frankly, the vast majority of our researchers are using commercial platforms in their data, because the universities are using commercial platforms for their research data management systems. By, in general, there's some open source, but many of them are using commercial. So where are they in our conversations?
You're welcome.
Okay.
Well, the EOSC Association and the EOSC Federation doesn't say that you cannot be a commercial party. Yeah, I have to comply with the rules and regulations that are made for the Federation, and the rules and regulations are made by the public sector. For example, Roche gave a presentation, not last symposium, but the symposium before that. Internally, they make all their data fair, for themselves, of course. But that doesn't mean that part of the data could not be combined with data outside and in the future be available for outside. And they don't limit it to research, they limit it not at all within the whole company. They cannot find their own data back. They have problems with storing. They have problems with, let's say, the provenance of data. And all of these things are the same problems we are having. And they have seen FAIR as a very good approach with respect to the principles that can help.
So I'm, so I'm going to go Vince's question, and then we're going to have a wrap up. Okay. So.
Yeah, on a lighter note, I should say that you must know that there's already lots of copies of your data. It may just not be fair or where you expect it to be. Yeah, I want to reopen this aspect of scale and generalization, because the two are intricately linked to one another. And for services, the boring part is figuring out at what level of generalization you run out of new customers that will pay for the complexity of that generalization. It's true for all products and services that runs operationally, that you need to increase your market share and the number of customers that you can serve until such point that there's no profit any longer. And we need to answer these boring questions for most of the services in EOSC. At what level of scale will they be sustainable? Is it an EU-wide scale? Is it a national scale? Can it be at an individual repository? And the questions that we need to attach to that is about scarcity of expertise, because some of these services require experts to maintain and supply them. And duplicating that expertise all over is not always feasible or cost effective.
So who wants to address that?
I mean, yeah, scaling and using the federation in particular as a vehicle to create economies of scale is something we have been discussing. Repetition is something that is coming up on this, duplication of work. There are very similar services that are being developed by different infrastructures that they would be very happy actually to outsource to some kind of, or share, the operations of these services within other partners within a federation. So, and this is also an approach that we're trying to explore to what extent the federation can actually, we're always discussing about how much we need to contribute to EOSC, right? EOSC can be also a cost-saving mechanism, not something that will cost us more money. Eventually, it should be a cost-saving mechanism if we manage to get to achieve these economies of scale within the federation. Now, this also touches upon the expertise. Once we have a place where we can bring together experts from different organizations, then this will be benefiting also organizations that will be lacking some of this expertise, right? So this kind of sharing also expertise across the federation. So there are some, we call them some of the kind of cross-federation services that we want to focus and explore to what extent they can actually be outsourced at the federation level so that we have this redundancy. There's no single point of failure, as was mentioned earlier, so that if one organization tomorrow will not be able to sustain this specific service provision, the other organizations within the federation will be able to continue. So this is something that we are discussing quite a lot, and I think it would be one of the of the work streams of building up the federation.
Yeah, we have some online questions, so I want to squeeze those in, so I'm going to pivot. So you have a quick response.
I just want to add, I fully agree with that. One of the principles we work along is as distributed as reasonable. So not as centralized as possible, on the contrary.
So actually it turns out our online questions include actually the very similar question that you were saying of him about this and was raised here about scale and working together on blockchain. Well, we could say quantum, and then quantum, blockchain, and AI means we get all of the words in. Excellent. But disaster recovery options for such infrastructure, I think we've covered that a little bit. If we want to have freedom of movement of data and research services in Europe, like labour, where many of these are provided nationally, shouldn't such an infrastructure be provided and paid on the EU level?
Well, the EU level is the combination of countries, so the best thing is a joint payment. It's as simple as that. If they first give it to the EU and they pay it back, it's counterproductive.
Do you want to make a Commission point of view?
Absolutely. You definitely need to get more money at the EU level. No, I mean, we have to also be realistic, right, in terms of how much money effectively comes through the EU channel and how much of the funding comes effectively through the national channels, and make best use of both of them. And again, I mean, many of these collaborations are international, but eventually the actual machines, the people sit within the countries, and most of the expenses are actually paid by the countries, not by the Commission. The Commission is there to make these links to kind of incentivize development in specific areas, but the majority of the support comes actually from national funding eventually, and this we have to exploit as much as possible as well.
I think that's the complexity that we're trying to square the circle. Okay, Mark.
Just to further comment on this, I don't think that it's just about paying, who pays for the service. Mostly naturally, the funding is labeled that it should be used by national researchers. So the services are not by default open up to European researchers. And I think there you need to have the changes in the regulations to which extent services, but also the funding of the services, is enabled to be used by any researchers in Europe. I think there you see the limitations.
Correct.
So last quick round. I think, Jan, didn't you have your hand up at one point and I missed you? No, okay, good. Okay, so one last question from outside in the internet. Research community and infrastructure should have common focus on a national level, yet you see policies of various universities for research infrastructure varies based on their budgets. So I think this is a question of how do you square the national level versus the institutional contribution, if I read that question correctly. So perhaps Andrew, actually I had this down as one of your questions in case we didn't get any questions, which was the practices and needs within institutions versus the national and the international level, because in the end, researchers actually live in institutions, and the institutions are where they have their software support and their data stewards and their research software engineers and their institutional repositories and yada, yada, yada. And that's where they also get their promotion from.
I'm glad you've given me an easy question with only 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So the standard joke about a university is it's a group of warring medieval city-states united by a parking policy.
Yes.
That's only a little harsh based on my experience of universities that I've worked at. The challenge is that research is, to a first approximation, international. No one says, I'm doing Australian chemistry. They say, I'm a chemist. So you have international disciplines Most of the infrastructure is funded nationally or pan-nationally in the case of Europe. And yet the researchers, as Carol has pointed out, are based inside institutions who are providing them with support services. And so the challenge is, how do you balance the international, for a researcher at least, how do I balance the requirements of my discipline against the infrastructure that's available to me in my country, against what my university tells me I have to do? And I don't think there is any easy answer there. I think that for the people in this room and the people who care about the kinds of things we care about, it's about working out what is the most efficient way to provide those services to the researcher. And sometimes it might be the institution does it. Sometimes it might be the country does it. Sometimes it might be, oh, we'll encourage you to use this national thing. I was having a conversation with Nick Duty, who's hiding in the audience somewhere, over morning tea about the protein data bank. For particular kinds of researchers, if you're doing protein crystallography, the place you put your data is the PDB, and you don't actually think about any other kinds of infrastructure. But that's not true for everybody. And so I think it's this more nuanced conversation about where's the best place to interact with the researchers and what's the most cost-effective and efficient way of providing the infrastructure that we need to have.
That's a great one. And PDB is one of the golden examples of, for 25 years, we hung in there hoping it might be useful, and then we got the AlphaFold, and it turned out to be jolly useful. But all the credit went to, hey, Google and AlphaFold. Actually, the credit was the 25 years of people who just did the curation. So let's give a shout out to curators there. So we have now 1 minute and 16 seconds. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a slogan. So for each one of you, what is the elevator pitch, one sentence you want to have people take away with you? And I'm going to get Natalie to go first because she has a PhD in theatre, so she'll be good at this. And that'll give you the opportunity. She shouldn't have told me that. And the rest of you can have a few seconds to think.
I want Natalie to dance her slogan.
Interpretive dance.
I'm just going to ignore everything you just said and say, the question I think we should ask ourselves, that I'll leave in a question instead of slogan, is how do we keep working towards better data for research, because it's for research, if we don't have any money or political will behind us? So I'm going to say we need to ask our American colleagues this, right? Because there's the administration and the researchers are not in line here, and the researchers are under siege. I wanted to make sure that point was clear. So this brings us back to the question of scientific networks and the idea of community and those sorts of things.
No money, no science, no future. That's your slogan.
No. No money, no political will. What science?
Ah, perfect.
Yeah.
But did somebody write that down?
Thank you.
Carol, inspire us. No, do you want to go next, Carol?
Well, I have minus 11 seconds, so...
Yeah. One sentence.
My slogan is very simple: keep on working on FAIR. I mean, if we look at the 4 strategic pillars we have defined for the near future, 26-27, EOSC Federation, FAIR and AI, research sovereignty and research security, and links with data spaces, EU data spaces, and the rest of the world. All these items have been addressed in this panel, and it's clear that FAIR is on the top of the list.
All right, that's several floors of the elevator pitch. Andrew.
Keep working to make the right thing easier.
Perfect. And finally, Pantelis.
I've been thinking I'll not be able to come with a good slogan. No, I mean, what I keep is this kind of the end user approach, right? We have eventually to see how the impact of this work that is being developed here, and it's excellent and beautiful, will actually bring real impact to the end user, which is the researcher eventually.
Yeah, so impact. Impact is what really matters. So can I just thank our excellent panelists? Can I thank our people who asked questions online and in the room? And thank you very much for stimulating and thought-provoking and in a little slightly depressing places. And let's just think of a lingerie when we need to be cheered up. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. So while Ruben takes the last picture, so with Ingrid and Tommy, we've discussed if we would have needed any closing message, and actually we still believe that no, because of how much has been said and discussed this today. So make them smile, so they can smile. Yeah. But But before we let you go, we really wanted to thank a number of people that have made all of this possible. So get ready. I expect clappings a lot, so get ready with your applauses. And we start with, so for having guided us through a travel through time, from past to future of the implementation of the FAIR principles in research in Europe and beyond, the FAIRfest Program Committee, Ingrid Diller, Tommy Suominen, Josephine Nordling, Paolo Manghi, Clément Jonquier, Jonas Gesaniemi, Joy Davidson, Fanier Adloff, Anne-Sophie Fink, Mark van de Sanden, Moran Grumpeter, and Karen Gobler. So for having made these 2 days so rich and concrete, the speakers, we counted 36 speakers, including the adopters of the FAIR solutions and the use case leaders who joined the parallel sessions. So big applause to you. For having explained how all the good purposes and recommendations can actually become a reality, the 15 adopters who pitched at the FAIRfest Marketplace, Maxence Azus-Tudero, Carol Goble, Moran Grumpeter, Hilde Horten, Elena Breitmoser, Robert Huber, Nina Grau, Guillaume Alvise, Jonas Kesaniemi, Costantina Galuni, George Katsoyanis, Wim Hugo, Sadet Bozachi, Heinrich Wiedmann, and Jan Lefranc. For having engaged all of us in the marketplace and for having worked hard to leave a legacy of these 2 days and of these 3 years, the 36 presenters of the posters and the owners of the 12 stands downstairs. For the many, many meetings and simply for making these 2 days running in such a smooth way and really such enjoyable, the organizing committee. Lisa Deleuve, Samantha Willems, Mark Verburg, Basse Kalaisi, Lion Neiman from Dance, Linda Freiman, DCC, Elisa Hallonen from CNC, and my wonderful colleagues, Sara Bozzi, Claudia Donofrio, Rita Menezes, and Robert Tognetti. We're not there yet. Then, for having made our life easier by setting everything up since Monday and convincing a few more speakers to join us, the organizers of the IDCC 2025 conference. I'm almost there. The staff here at Madurodom and the guys over there at Patesman for a great venue and a great audiovisual support. Thank you a lot. Thanks to the European Commission, here represented by Pantelis today, for having trusted us over the last 3 years and for supporting, among the other things, also this festival. So, applause to the Commission. The FAIR Impact and the FAIR Code for Years Consortia for these 3 amazing years together, the next 3 months to come, and who knows, hopefully a fair future to come. With them, there are a lot. With them, the members of the High-Level Advisory Committee of FAIR Impact and the FAIR Champions for precious guidance and advice and for strategic dissemination through the national communities. And last, you all as participants for this festival, on-site and those online. We don't want this festival atmosphere to stop, so we call you to an action. We hope that the FAIRfest will be taken forward by someone else. We don't know who, but the floor is open, games are not over, seeds have been sown. So have a safe trip back home and enjoy the weekend. So I've been asked to tell you that the Taste of the Holland room cannot be used for now, but light lunch or some light sandwiches are being offered in the foyer for those who don't need to rush. Okay. Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot. So we we also opened the last Menti exactly to keep this festival going on. So let us know if you feel satisfied with the FAIRfest. So there are a few yes options. But there is also a following up question. Leave us your comments, okay, for improving the next edition of the festival. Yep.
You say you like the wind blowing through your hair. Well, come on, roll with me till the sun goes down. Texas sun. Say you wanna hit the highway while the engine roars. Well, come on, roll with me till the sun goes down. Texas sun, oh yeah. Texas sun, caressing you from Fort Worth to Amarillo. Well, come on, roll with me till the sun dips low. Texas sun. Texas sun, oh girl. Texas sun. When I'm far from home and them cold winds blow, stuck out somewhere, folks I don't know. 'Cause you keep me nice and you keep me warm. Wanna feel you on me, can't wait to get back there again. Texas sun. Texas sun.